All right. You good? All right. Kicking off QuaranCon. All right. This is interior world building. It's the first workshop I'm ever doing, so let's hope it goes well. I'm here with Crystal Matar and Angela Board in voice chat.
I would wave, but you can't see me.
And
Hello.
I'm about to do a share screen so everyone can see the PowerPoint I've made for all of this. If it will allow me to, I guess. Of course, we're gonna have a bit of an issue here, apparently. Fuck. Well, fuck it. It's not letting me show the screen, so we're off to a wonderful start. You know what? I can do this as a monologue then. All right, so this is interior world building. And this is basically going to be a bit of a workshop for anyone who's having trouble sort of like giving their characters what they feel is a well-rounded sort of interior life, interior monologue. Anyone with trouble writing emotions, anyone who has trouble like creating like a history for their characters, things like that. And basically this workshop is aimed to answer a couple questions. Things like what would make a character feel real. It's going to investigate like why they feel real and how good writers can do that, and how you can apply like a lot of the techniques that are used to create like well-rounded characters. A little bit, I should probably start with a little bit about like a word about myself, just so you know whether or not to take me seriously. My name is Connor Caplan. I wrote a book called The Sword in the Street, and it was an SPFBO semi-finalist last year. I have a lot of my reviews end up quoting the idea that I write from a very character-driven point of view. There's a quote that I wrote down in the PowerPoint from Justin Gross at Fanfiatic. It says, "I've never read a more realistic portrayal of mental health in a work of fiction." So like, there's like the people who read my book apparently seem to think that I know what I'm doing here.
Why don't you try sharing your screen again? Taya says it should work now.
All right. Let me see.
This is great for building confidence.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. It's everything. Like we've started off on this kind of note, so now it's just sort of like, you know, we gotta jump in with very low expectations.
Yeah, and then you're gonna blow us away.
Literally. Man, it's still not working for me. I think it's a problem on my end, and I don't know how to fix this on the fly. Wait, I might be able to fix this on the fly actually. Well, I'm really leaning into the sort of lower your expectations kind of thing. No, apparently the option to record the screen is going to end the Zoom chat. So I think this is just monologue now. It's good. It's going to be great. No. This is going to be sort of focused on character building. And hopefully you plan your character building better than I planned this sort of.
I laugh because I love you.
Yeah, no, it's great.
This is so perfectly on brand, but it's okay. You've got great things to say. Just
a lot of this I sort of planned. Like I didn't plan for this to have like a PowerPoint until like last week. So I already
and then you really invested in it.
Yeah, I really invested. I had like a bunch of pictures picked out and everything. It was going to be a whole thing. I had to make sure I had the right layout and like it's like, oh my god, no, it's going to be great. So, you know, we should start by defining our terms. Honestly, like the idea of interior world building, I don't believe that is common parlance in any sort of writing community that I'm aware of. So I want to start with just first defining like world building. I know this is an SFF sort of panel, so a lot of people are going to know what that is. The idea that you're constructing like an imaginary setting that feels engaging, well thought out, and like immersive. The idea of like having magic or tech, having a degree of history, religion or culture, the landscape or geography of your world, politics, what are the acceptable ideals and ideologies. I don't know if Crystal or Angela have any extra sort of examples for what good world building would be.
Food, duh.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. Yeah, you have a lot.
Come on,
of
Angela, back me up.
Yeah, definitely food. But you know,
Yeah.
like there's all sorts of things like music, art.
Oh yeah.
You can put like all sorts of little details and build up worlds, just like
There's so much world building just in like daily lives that we don't even think of as being world building because we're living it in real time. But
right.
Yeah, things like just like fashion, like what do they wear in the morning, what do they have for breakfast, things like
yeah.
that.
And then what is taken for granted as well,
right.
And what is rare and precious, and those things tend to shift a lot. And when they shift in a really opposite direction, it's hard for people to bridge that gap sometimes and figure out what that must feel like. But then it's just about what's important to us, really. And
we tend to think of world building in like the big senses, like the magic, the tech, like the politics. But really, when you're building a world, make it feel real and lived in, it comes down to like little tiny details.
The daily lives. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And so for a lot of this, interior world building for me is sort of like the inverse of the conventional understanding of what world building actually is. It's the idea that the application of the theory that the mind is just sort of another type of setting. Idea space is like a terrain that you can navigate the same way a character would navigate a more physical setting. I don't know if this is going to get a little bit high concept, but it's sort of like, I believe Alan Moore once was talking about a thing with the idea of a chair is not necessarily and real in any sense that you can measure in the objective sense of in like the material world, but in some sort of situations, the idea of a chair is something that is more powerful and more important than any sort of physical chair that actually exists. And a lot of, I think, character writing leans into that idea of the interior space that a character lives in and the context that they're in is very much prioritized. Not to say that the physical world is unimportant, but like there's more of a focus of what's going on internally. Things like the way emotions can sit in the body, the places someone's focus can kind of go, things like memories, what biases do they have, various sort of contextual like sort of layers of meaning, both the layers that you have for like the life that this character has lived, and then there are sort of metatextual layers that you can add in depending on what relationship your work has to the real world. You can do a lot with allegories to work that's influenced you, or like various sort of mythological or legends that you can draw on if it is appropriate for your setting. There are a lot of cultural or emotional signifiers that you can draw on that I think can really help for character building. And a lot of this drills down to a theory I've had for a while now, which is that writing is basically like math with like an extra dose of like empathy, basically. It's there's this idea that I tend to advocate, the idea that words are just kind of like cultural and emotional data. So every sentence should have a certain emotional weight that you are trying to push towards. And it's a matter of picking out the right emotional signifiers for the end result that you're trying to get. So in this context, it would be like, since like tying back to the point that it's more character focused, a lot of the sentences you're building should kind of just be focused on like, where's this guy at? Where's this character at right now? Like, and how do I convey this in the best way possible? Usually a lot of emotions that a character can be feeling have a certain amount of like ways that we will feel or describe it that genuinely gives someone a handhold to unpack it without actually getting to say it. Like, instead of saying a character is angry, there's a lot of context you can provide. There's a lot of language that with like heat and tension that you can take advantage of if you want to get really vivid with like the way they're processing it, like in a physical sense. Usually it helps if someone's really angry to have really big, sharp, sort of like incisive sentences. Or something with like joy is usually going to involve something like warmth or memory. There's a good trick you can actually play with memory, especially with joy, is like, what kind of memories are they associating joy with? Are they remembering another time they have experienced a similar emotion, or are they going to be like, I'm having a much better time than that asshole? Like, how they relate their emotions to other experiences that a character that they've had is really something that goes a long way in terms of character work. I'm trying to think of another example. Exhaustion is another one where you can really layer in a lot of seemingly unrelated ideas. At least the way I write exhaustion tends to be like with a lot of emphasis on weight. There are there's a lot of stuff in Sword in the Street, especially that alludes to the idea of metallurgy, or like metal like growing hot and just sort of drooping. There's memories can be heavy. It can sometimes architecture is another thing that sort of can really work well to build out as like a metaphor for how someone's feeling. A lot of this is stuff that just arrives in layers as you go. And a lot of the ways I think you end up getting good with character work and writing this kind of thing and making it feel lived in is sort of by reading people who are good at it. We have a couple people
like Angela Board.
Yeah, I was gonna say Crystal and Angela are really good at character writing. Yeah. A lot of I can kind of testify to this personally because I've read both of your books and I've done a lot of exploitation of your books to be like, I need to figure out how the fuck they did that in that scene, because I need to figure out what you know.
Yeah,
I'll get you the PowerPoint I've made on it, just since I apparently can't share it here. A lot of figuring out good character writing, I think, can be solved again like a math equation. It requires a lot of explication and intentionality. So I hope you were paying attention in English class when you were in high school and everything, because a lot of those skills were taught to you. Oh man. So there are a lot of I think close reading is the best sort of example for how to figure out how these things work. And I mean, there are a lot of YouTube.
For someone who has failed English class, could you please explain what a close reading is? Because I've heard there's a pop quiz on close readings in this course, and I don't know what that means.
A close reading is when you're taking usually like a paragraph or something, or your sentence of someone's work, and you're basically unpacking all the literary devices that are used to achieve the effect that they're going for. I'm trying to think of an example.
I know what you mean. I now I know what you mean. I didn't know there was a word for it.
Yeah,
that's just what I did when writing makes me angry and I want it to be better. And so I unpack everything that I feel like I would have done differently.
Right. There's and that sort of works on two levels. There's the stuff that doesn't work for you, and like you have to unpack it to figure out why. And then like there's figuring out how to unpack the stuff that works for you, which can be more challenging, I think, because if it's a level above where you're at, you're not always going to know how they did what they did. There are a lot of
that's
YouTube
usually when I read something about 16 times and then I have the book memorized.
Yeah, no, whatever way like sort of works is going to help you up your game. It's I think, again, like it's like a math equation. It's like long division, except like with words and empathy, and just trying to like once you can disassemble it, it becomes a lot easier to figure out how to reassemble it with your own stuff and apply it to your own sort of emotional context if you're trying to nail your heart to the wall. Which sort of brings me to the pop quiz, which is the idea that it's an excerpt from Alistair Kardec's The Old Love and the New. And the sentence is, the bicycle chain in my mind comes loose, and now I'm pedaling really fast with no resistance. And the question is basically, what is happening in this sentence? How do you know that that's what's happening? And why does it work if you think it works?
It works because Alistair's brilliant.
Well,
obviously.
Yes. Yeah. But Alistair's clearly brilliant. But like,
well, I think that it also evokes an experience that many of us have maybe had. Like if you ride bicycles, yeah, you know what happens when your chain comes off and then you're trying to like, pedal and you're not going anywhere. You're not in control of your machine anymore. It's like everything has gone and you have to like either stop and fix it or, you're just going to crash.
Right. Yes, that is exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about, where it's like there are a lot of imported layers of meaning that are packed into that sentence. And it's like you could have gotten across what was happening in that sentence with some kind of like my mind was racing sort of thing, or more sort of spelling it out in a more sort of direct manner. But I don't think without the bicycle metaphor, I think it reads more flatly and doesn't quite land with the same kind of punch. And I think a lot of good sort of like character writing is in general just sort of has one eye on like how much can I fit into this sort of into the amount of space that I've got. There are some really good ways you can do that with history, both like of your character's history and also like the history of the broader world that your character lives in. Like what big events have they lived through? How has that shaped them? How do they feel about certain events? And like, can you play with that in terms of like how they feel versus how others feel about various events in their world? And then there are the personal memories of the things they've lived through that are really just like what you guys were talking about earlier with like the personal things that sometimes you don't even think about. You can do a lot with the relationship of what makes someone think about those things, what brings them back to like very important memories they have. And it can help, I think it can help with character writing to like have it at least a few sort of like really good past events that have shaped them into the kind of person they are when you start the book. I tend to do a lot of prep beforehand when I write, but a lot of times I find from talking to people who do a more free write sort of approach, a lot of those events sort of arrive in layers, like after each sort of pass. And I think you can play around with that a lot. The idea of like how do they feel about those memories and what events trigger those memories, and comparing them to what they're dealing with right now. Like you could have a sentence that like a character's like stepping out into the daylight, and there's this sort of general, he was still tired from the night before, versus the idea of like he hadn't been this tired since like the morning after he pissed away a couple $100 worth of whiskey or something. And suddenly, now that you've got that context there, you've inputted a lot more context of what kind of a person this is. And like there's, this person feels more alive and lived in than if you're just saying how they're feeling in that moment. I don't think anyone is really going from place to place to sort of fully just living in that moment. There are a lot of experiences you're relating to in anything you're kind of doing, and finding places in your stories to build that out is really a good way to add a layer of context and deepen who you're writing about and build layers of empathy. There's another good technique that involves an emphasis on the physical, both in like the way they process emotions. I've already talked a bit about that before, like the idea that like emotions kind of have like a weight like in your physical body, and like sometimes they hit different, and like just getting into the sort of visceral sense of how that feels can really add to the sense of what they're going through. And then when you layer that in with like memory and history and things like that, it starts getting really dynamic, and you're like, you start to really like build something there. But there's also the idea of like, how are they navigating the world around them? What kind of how does sensory stimulus affect them? How do biases affect them? What parts of like the places they're navigating are like the things that bleed into the background, and what kind of things do they notice? I remember seeing a study a while back of like so there was something where someone asked a bunch of different people from a bunch of different backgrounds to describe like the same point in a city, and depending on the kind of person they asked, you get like completely different answers about what stood out for them. There was like someone who was an engineer, someone who was like an architect, like someone who was like I think like a poet was in there or something. And like depending on like the kind of profession they had, there are different things they notice, and that's something to really keep in mind as you're building this. Is like, whose point of view are you in? What are the things they're going to notice, and what things aren't they going to notice? Having an eye on like how reliable the things you're relaying are can really help. And even just going back to the idea of like writing being data, even the word choices you use can really, you can build out how they're feeling about something without quite saying it directly. I actually, in the PowerPoint, I have a quote from the book that I'm writing right now, which because since I'm writing it, I kind of know what I'm going for with it and everything. And I had a character coming home for the first time in a long time, and the sentence the sentences I used to introduce like this big fortress that had been their home they hadn't been back to in a while was the fortress hadn't changed since childhood, and it robbed me of my breath. The foundations were made of cinder bricks stretched into spires of steel and concrete, gift wrapped in razor wire. The ancient walls would shed dust like dead skin that came down in a gray rain on the days when the wind was fast and heavy, and when the real rain came, that dust thickened to finger paint. And so a lot of the things I'm doing there are just sort of like, this is the character that's supposed to be very conflicted, feeling a sense of nostalgia, but also there's an edge of danger. And so I'm adding things like gift wrap and finger paint to just sort of build out the idea of like, there's a degree of it's not altogether like foreboding, but then there's the idea of like cinder bricks and razor wire and things like that like are just sort of building an idea of dread. And I don't want to come out and be like, I have mixed feelings about this, but I'm trying to allude to it with like the kinds of words I'm choosing to describe just what otherwise might just be like a fortress. I feel like I should stop for questions now. I feel like it's been quiet for a little bit. I don't know if anyone has questions. All right.
I've been breaking up more breakfast fights, so.
Oh no.
How some interior world building and some conflict too. I would like to listen to Connor Caplan. But the conflict is there's conflict.
Oh. No, I love that. No, I'm glad you. I'm glad you prioritized it the way that you did, though. No, that's
no one's bleeding. It's okay. But I do like what you were saying about how, to my point, the conflict of emotions can really lead to language that contradicts itself, where you're talking about gift wrapped in razor wire. It's like those things say a lot. They're just small words, but it carries a lot of meaning. And that's, I think, what you're trying to illustrate as to intelligence. I totally lost my train of thought, but no, that illustrates what you're saying about how a person's language is shaped by not only where they're at emotionally, but also their level of internal melodrama.
Yeah.
and
I like that.
Peter vibes that way. Oh, Addison, get off me. Peter vibes that way, but like Arsenal would not be making such flowery statements about, and it's perfect. It's a perfect way to build out different narrative voices, especially if you tend to go in first person. Like for Sword in the Street, Edwin is more melodramatic and John is more dry and tired of shit. And so understanding where your characters are coming from lets you decide how to lean into language, or whether to keep it sparse, or whether to let them say something is gift wrapped in barbed wire.
Yeah, I like that. Angela, did you have anything?
No, I mean, I agree with everything Crystal said, or because it's like because I guess it's a lot more subtle when you're doing it that way, to portray a character's emotional state by the kinds of the way they kind of interact with their environments and the things that they're remembering or whatever. And you kind of have to, it's like you're building an emotional state rather than just saying, you know, like, oh, he was scared, he was conflicted, he was whatever, which I think that even when characters are like really dramatic, that's the way you avoid melodrama on the page. Like, that's not right. We're all trying to like, oh no, purple prose, you know, like we want to stay away from that. And that's kind of one way of doing it, I guess, because then the reader after a while gets an image in their mind of who this person is and where they've been. So
yeah, purple prose is just a tool. Like, it's not, some people act like it's an inferior narrative device, but it's just a tool, and like you can overuse it for sure, and make it too much and too distracting. But if your character has a tendency to overreact to things, or alternatively has the tendency to really appreciate a beautiful moment, it's an important tool, and it should be treated as such. Yeah, no, it's sort of it goes back to the idea that I think a lot of emotional writing is not dissimilar from the tools you use to build out a larger world. The idea of like, there are some points in a story where if like
if you're really getting into the idea of describing like the grassy knoll or something, or the meadow or whatever you want, whatever, like it's gonna be like, it's gonna hit just sort of like, all right, come on, it's just some grass, let's get on with this. Like, but at other points, in the right emotional context, that can really hit home. I feel like it's a matter of paying attention to like what kind of a person you're writing and the kinds of things they vibe with. I feel like when purple prose doesn't work is when it's almost like a discordant note. The idea that someone's just drinking coffee and had just woken up, and you're just describing it like it's the most beautiful thing to ever exist on earth. It's like, that's the reason that doesn't work, isn't because like the words there are like bad or like it can't be done. The reason it doesn't work is because like that's the wrong tool set for this emotional moment. Which sort of layers in the idea that I basically keep trying to hit at, which is the idea of like a lot of good character writing is really trying to keep in mind like where they're at, and like bringing information about them out of very small details. There's a lot that you can do with like just the way that you describe things. Like I had in the PowerPoint a quote of just like a character just ducking under a desk to fix like an internet connection or something. And like you can describe that very flatly if you just want to describe it that way. But like if depending on the kind of approach you want to take, like you can describe it almost like diffusing a bomb, if that's the kind of person you're dealing with. You can describe it like it's a kind of descent to the underworld, if that's the way you want to play it. It's like, it's really important to keep in mind like who you're dealing with and how they're thinking of the situation. And a lot of that is going to build like a really good context and make the headspace you're writing feel really lived in. And I think a lot of good sort of interior world building generally involves like this attentiveness. The same way exterior world building involves like attentiveness to like, does this all like gel together? A lot of it, when putting it together, involves like a lot of attentiveness to emotion, like the idea of physicality, like how they're feeling internally, like with what their emotions are doing to their body, and also how they navigate the exterior world. And then when you layer in like history and memories, and keep track of your word choices, and the way that you're going about describing all of this together, it ends up building something that's more realistic and lived in. Although as a disclaimer, I should probably say like this does not happen from the first draft. I don't want to be giving anyone some kind of like false hope.
Yeah. I can attest to the fact that it's like you tell the story to yourself first, and then you figure out what these people think and feel about all this stuff happening, and then you can layer that in, and then you figure out also where they're coming from, and you can layer that in too. And so yeah, it is worth being said that, I mean, some people are able to draft really clean on the first pass, and power to them, man. I admire that skill.
Not me.
Yeah, but not me. So yeah, it's emotionality is a thing that you don't have to nail on the first try. And in fact, getting feedback from people and seeing how they react to certain moments is really crucial, because if they've gone the wrong direction, if readers are going the wrong direction, and mostly you know that they're your audience and they should be following along with you, then that's your chance to circle back and hit it again, so that your words are weighing properly in the discussion. And then, or alternatively, if they have gone in the right direction, or if your readers have come in the right direction but not strongly enough, then you can make it worse. I mean, better, worse.
Worse for the characters. That's all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which makes it better.
I feel like, oh man, I totally had something for a moment that was going to be really smart. No, I just lost it. Fuck. The idea that, as an example for like how this can kind of arrive in layers was for my own work. I spent like a while writing the book that I just quoted from, where it was intended to be more of a sort of straightforward kind of romantic fantasy kind of thing. And then I sent it to Angela, and Angela pointed out the idea that like the character I had written was not necessarily the most emotionally mature person available, and was generally not like, none of the context that I had built around that necessarily supported the original conception that I had of it.
Surely you're not talking about Peter. He is so mature and emotionally
I love Peter though.
stable. I know, I love him too.
He's great. He's a mess, but that's interesting.
Yeah. No, I love him. He's great, but he's just the biggest hot mess. And it did not, like, I remember getting those notes back, and it was just sort of like everything slowed down into slow motion, and I was like, oh no, I'm gonna have to revise this so much. Oh, this is gonna be some deep revision. But it's good because it ends up like it ends up gelling a lot more, because like if you're writing someone who's like a fucking hot mess and they end up having like a more straightforward sort of like bromance, but like the most important context I think to all of this is Peter in this book that I'm writing is not someone who's necessarily had a lot of skill in cultivating very meaningful relationships. And here he is in the latter half of this book having a meaningful relationship with someone without necessarily having established that he has any of those tools. And so I feel like a lot of your approach to like figuring out like changes from past to past as you figure out like sometimes your original conception of who this person was not necessarily supported by the way the story ended up going, and you kind of have to go like, all right, do I have to change something about this character to make the original idea work better? Is that the thing that's more important to me, or do I like what I have here more, and I should take out the story element to make sure that I'm writing this from the right sort of perspective and making sure everything sort of hangs together in the way that would make sense. And I think a lot of character writing is generally trying to get to that level, and it takes multiple passes to really figure it out and get there. In the same way that like you're never going to meet someone for the first time and immediately know like exactly what they're about. You have to talk to them for a little while to really figure out where they're at and how they're doing, and know how to react to what they're giving you. And I feel like it's sort of like a relationship in that sort of sense.
There's also something to be said for being self-aware enough to know how you communicate as a person, or for our characters to be self-aware enough to know. And a lot of the juiciest drama comes out of characters who are not that self-aware and say things and then are shocked by how people react to this obnoxious thing that they've said. And so you can force some growth or not, depending on the arc you're wanting to tell, based on how they come to understand why people are reacting to them in a certain way. And if that reaction is consistent, what can they do about potentially reducing that trait in themselves? But if, and then you can play onto their own insecurities and you know, is this me or is this them sort of things. And yeah.
Yeah.
Or in relationship too. Like, you know, like I think it's like a lot of, if you're looking back at your world building kind of metaphor too, like a lot of the world building happens when characters relate to their world, and then you throw stuff in, so then you don't info dump, you know. But like characters, you're building their relationships with the other characters, and so you build a lot of their interior through the way, or I do anyway, like that they relate to the other characters, and like you're kind of showing, because sometimes some characters can get emotions out of another character that no other characters can do. Like they would never show that emotion unless, you know, so.
That's something you do actually really well, I think. You have the relationship you have between two characters almost feels like has a sense of character in its own right. That's something I really loved about, I just finished a beta read of Through Dreams So Dark, and that's one of the things I love most, is the idea of Sergei's relationship to Cam has a different sense of character than his relationship to like Maddie or Kirill or anyone else in that book. But they all have a sense of like they all seem like sort of like the relationships themselves seem like their own sort of independent character in a sense, in the same way that like a city can be a character, a relationship can be a character. I think that's I'm out of slides from the PowerPoint. So I mean, if we want to switch to questions or anything.
I think Gray said something about your forearms, so I feel like you should flex them.
I mean, I've been doing that with the stress toy.
Yeah, there you go. That's for you, Gray.
Oh my god, I'm dying.
Aren't you glad you invited me here to help?
Yeah, no, I'm feeling great. Yeah, I feel very supported.
I do have a question. So when you're writing, when you're trying to build out your character, like how conscious are you of making all these choices, you know, as you go along? Because you talked about how some people go through and it just sort of comes up, you know, which would be me. Like I'm not terribly conscious until I'm doing a pass, and then somebody's told me they're not coming off right, and then I'll like try to go back and, you know, fix stuff so it kind of gets deeper into what I wanted it to be. So when it seems like when you write that you're different, like you're making conscious choices as you go along, even in the early drafts. Is that true? Is that how you do things?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like obviously from you've read The True Reckoning and everything in the early draft, so it's like it's not perfect from the get-go, but a lot of the way I write centers around like the idea of the outline is 30,000 words, and it's just sort of like I just got to get that shit down so that I know what I'm doing, and once I have that, the actual writing of the scenes almost feels like rewriting, because it's just like I have like every scene is like anywhere from 500 to 1,000 words, just all caps, like blocking everything out, and like rudimentary dialogue. And so by the time I actually get there, I have more sort of room in my head to actually like think through the idea of like, well, how do I want to say this? There are multiple points where I'm going to write a scene, and I've left a little note for myself in brackets of like, here's what they're dealing with. Here's how you want to get there. You really want to make sure this is showing up for when you write this scene. And I'm telling you now because you're going to forget when you come back to it. And so I come back to it like, oh, hey, no, okay, I'm glad I have that. Now I know what I'm aiming towards. And sometimes what I'm aiming towards was not correct. Usually there's a sort of gut feeling I get if it's really feeling like pulling teeth to get to where the note said I was supposed to go, or if it's going in a more interesting direction than where the note said it was going to go. I end up sort of like going in a different direction with it. But usually it's able to generally stay on track enough that I don't have to make any sort of big changes. But yeah, a lot of the time, when I actually write most scenes, I get very intentional about it. Like with the thing when I was describing a lot of emotions, there's like a certain number of it's kind of depends on the things I've read recently. Every now and then when I read something, I'll pick up like a couple favorite words to like that I'll just reuse too much. But usually whenever I'm writing something, there's a certain amount of emotion or context or word choices that I have in my head that I'm trying to build towards. And I'm generally trying to make sure as many sentences as I can be something that someone hasn't really seen before. And I'm trying to make it as unique as possible. And it's very much helped by the idea that I have a lot of work already done for me by the time I'm ready to actually write the scene. And now we're quiet. Okay. Have there been any questions in the YouTube chat, or I missed it? I haven't been able to see the YouTube chat.
I'm not seeing any questions.
All right. Yeah,
but a lot of agreeing, of particularly wrong tool set for the moment was a good one that resonated with people, as well as okay, Gray is asking, how do you think we can write characters that have experienced trauma with their perspective influenced by it without reducing them to nothing more than that trauma?
Oh, that's a fun one. Oh, okay. I have to figure that for a second.
I think it's almost not, I don't want to say it's not possible, but it's like once we are uploaded with that much trauma, it's almost impossible to see the world without that lens. And I think what it becomes is letting them have the journey and just be a mess, and then hopefully help them grow through it. But this isn't my workshop, so I'm gonna shut up.
You're good. No, I really like that answer. It's I think there's a good, this isn't technically world building so much as it's an analogy to real life. It's sort of like how can you tell the history of America without the legacy of colonialism, white supremacy and everything? Like it's going to be there. But I think the important thing, like, and it's a factor in like most key historical events. I think but I think there's an important thing to sort of highlight is the idea of like it's there, but that's not all it is. It's going to oh god, now I sound like I'm pairing trauma with racism. I do not mean to do that at all. I just like the idea that
I think the idea is that there's going to be complexities that you almost can't avoid, and to pretend that they're not there is doing the complexity a disservice. And so certainly it'll take a lot of revision and a lot of adjustments to get to a place where the character and their trauma and potentially their healing is expressed in a genuine and validating way. But it's not going to be an easy task, and it shouldn't be an easy task because it's not an easy thing to live with.
No, and I think that like a character who has experienced trauma is going to see that it's going to alter the way they see the world and relate to other characters in general. But on the other hand, when you're building a character through a story, that's not they'll have other aspects of their character and emotion that will come up in different kinds of scenes. So I think probably the way to do it is if you were writing all of the same kind of scene, it might seem kind of one note, like that would be the only thing that they were about.
Like a stereotype.
Yeah. And then there's also the consideration that yes, there is trauma, but so too will there be happy memories that impact certain moments as well.
Yeah.
So it's just about letting the character lead you through their emotional tangle. And sometimes the good things are tangled up with the bad things too, where and you can just let that breathe and let that be honest about it. And I think that has the potential to be really powerful.
And let the character grow through it too, like through their the story, the things that happen to them in the story, and the way that they interact with the other characters interact with them should change them in some way. Like it won't ever, like maybe it won't untangle the entire mess, but maybe they'll get like new threads layered in,
or maybe their journey is just seeing that it is a mess and accepting that.
Right. It's like all depends on the character.
It's
like
always
what they're gonna do.
It's always been a factor into them to some degree. It's a lens they're going to approach certain situations with. But it's not the totality of everything that these people are.
Pam has a question as well, and I think we have to answer Pam. That's the rule.
Yeah. Oh, obviously, yeah.
And so how much does their physical movement and or stance reflect the inner world that you've built?
Oh, that one's fun. I like that.
I know. We've got a great audience.
One of my favorite scenes to write is when a character is absolutely losing it and they can't let it show. And because like that you can get a lot of mileage with the idea of like someone is freaked out, losing their mind, but they have to look calm. And then you get to the extra layer where you're building the idea of a character being like, what the fuck does calm look like? How do I do this? And like how they think they're coming across versus how other people are reacting to them. I feel like there's a lot that you can play with in regards to the idea of there's the contrast or the parallels between where they're at on the inside versus how they're coming across physically. You can do a lot with body language. Like you can especially do that to illustrate a lot of power dynamics too. Like if someone who has power over another character is committing some sort of social faux pas or something like that, and the other character can't call them out or something, you can play a lot on that if they have to be polite, but they're just sort of seething inside. There's a lot of really fun stuff you can do with the contrast of the physical space they're inhabiting versus the emotional space that they're moving through. Trying to think, is there anything else? Anything else I can add to that?
I think we're at 5 minutes, so this would be your time to plug your book and talk about how great you are.
My book is called The Sword in the Street. There's a lot of a lot of the writing, like I've talked about here, is very character centric. There are no PowerPoints, so you don't have to worry about anything going wrong on that front. It's got an autistic point of view. It's queer. There's lots of sword fights. I'm working to get another book called The Trim Reckoning out later this year, which is a science fantasy book with another autistic point of view character. It's also queer, and this time there are cyborg horses and sonic guns and shit. So that one's gonna be great. Yeah, no, I hope the workshop is helpful. I hope that the idea that they're generally tools that you can use to identify what's being done to build good characters and break that down and reassemble it in your own kind of way. I hope it's useful. I hope people get, and I just, at the end of the day, I just hope people are getting something out of this whole thing. And is there anything I need to do to sign off?
No, just say goodbye to the nice people.
All right, goodbye. All right.
Wave, Connor.
Am I doing good?
Okay, you're no longer live.